Hi everybody, Michael Davis here. Welcome to Bone2Pick, and we are coming to you today from New City and the headquarters of Hip-BoneMusic. We are very, very fortunate to have one of the most successful and one of the most in-demand French horn players on the New York scene of all time with us today, the great John Clark. John has been on top of his game for over 4 decades. His extraordinary recording and performance credits include Joni Mitchell, Ornette Coleman, McCoy Tyner, Sting, Pat Metheny, the Brooklyn Philharmonic, Frank Sinatra, Dave Grusin, John Scofield, LL Cool J, Jaco Pastorius, Billy Joel, Toots Thielmans, and a longtime association with the great Gil Evans. He has appeared on hundreds, if not thousands, of television commercials and television themes, dozens of motion picture soundtracks. He's an esteemed educator and author. He's currently on the faculty of Manhattan School of Music, inventor of the Hornet, which we'll talk a little bit about. Also founded his own label, Hidden Meaning Music, which he's released 6 solo projects on that imprint. He also won the Downbeat Critics Poll 4 years in a row back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I'm honored to have him here today. He's a friend for a long time. Always a pleasure to getting a chance to play with John, and we just did a big band recording a couple weeks ago that kind of reunited, so it's great to see John. And John, thanks so much for coming all the way up to New City to talk about your extraordinary career.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Let's jump way back. I know you were born in Brooklyn and you grew up in Rochester. Did your undergrad at University of Rochester. Maybe talk a little bit about your memories as a young person and how you got into music and excited about music.
Of course. My grandfather was an organist and a choir director, and he started me on piano at age 7. And I'm going to skip right ahead. I had trouble coordinating my right and left hands. I loved playing the piano, and I could really swing with my right hand and my left hand, but putting them together was a problem. So I kept that up for a while, and I guess it was too frustrating for everyone else in the family to listen to me practice. So at age 9 or 10, I'm not sure, I started playing trumpet in school. I liked the trumpet a lot. And then one day they took it away and gave me a mellophone. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's curved. It's got a little more tubing. Oh, this might be fun. And I don't know, I didn't have that for very long before they took that away and gave me a French horn. And I said, wow, this is really challenging, you know. So that was fun. I kept that up for a while. And it seemed like I had talent, so I got to play in some of the all-state orchestras and bands and stuff like that. Didn't like marching very much. Yeah, so I kind of like got myself kicked out of the marching band at around age 12. See, I'm going fast, right?
I like it. I like it.
7 to 10 to 12. And I got interested in the guitar and the electric bass, really because of what I was listening to. There was classical music being played at home, and it never really grabbed me. Mm-hmm. But as soon as I got a chance to listen to Elvis and Chuck Berry and the Motown sounds that were coming out of my AM radio, I said, well, it's probably going to be guitar or bass, mm-hmm. right? So I started playing guitar for a while. The thing from then on is kind of vague because the problem was I was never a really good student. I had talent and I could like pick up an instrument and do stuff with it, but to really move ahead, which you know very well, requires practice and perseverance and everything. And at that point in my life, I just didn't have that. So I just kept dabbling and going back and forth from one instrument to another. The guitar really was what got me interested in jazz.
Okay.
Okay, and so I started listening to jazz. Miles was probably one of my first ones, Miles Ahead, and actually Coltrane as well around that same time. Those two were like major beacons for me, you mm-hmm. know what I mean? But I didn't have the chops, and I didn't have what I needed to get the chops to really get into that. But I was playing the guitar, And somehow I got into arranging. I took a summer workshop at Eastman in arranging, and I thought, okay, well, I'll go to Berkeley. And I was all set to go to Berkeley when I came this close to being drafted into the Army. Now, this was, at this point, if you got drafted into the Army, pretty sure you were going to go to Vietnam.
Right.
So this was a real quirk of fate that happened right then. I hadn't touched my French horn in I don't know how long, but maybe the same day or the next day after I got that draft notice in the mail, a friend called me that I hadn't seen in a long time, and this is true, you can't make up stuff like this. And he said, John, I don't think you'd really be interested in this, but I just happened to think of you when I heard that they need a French horn player in the Coast Guard Band in New London. And I said, thanks a lot, I got to make another call. So within a week or 10 days, I was in the Coast Guard.
Wow, okay.
Just like that. So
what was that experience like? I know that's always been a terrific band. I can imagine at that time it was probably loaded with great players.
There were a lot of young men in the same position that I was.
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
But a lot of them had already been to music school, and they already knew stuff about music, and they knew how to play and everything. I was just like someone who could kind of play the French horn, right? So the thing that was really great about being there, it gave me time to work on actually keep up practicing the guitar and the bass and arranging and so on. But while I was there, I discovered that I really was pretty fascinated, and I wouldn't say in love, but I dug playing the French horn. One day in particular, like I said earlier, I didn't care for marching that much, but we had to do quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
And one day we were in a kind of a formation or something, playing at a ceremony. It was very, very hot, and we were playing marches, and I was thinking, I'm really fascinated with just the idea that you can into this thing and get this beautiful sound out of the end of it. And that's just like a really fundamental, basic thing that I realized, and it sort of motivated me to continue on with it. Now, the guys around me, everyone else in the French horn section and the other brass players, tuba, trombone, a lot of them had been to music school and were very much into orchestral playing. So that influenced me, and I thought, oh, this is cool. Oh, the French horns played this in this Mahler symphony and so on and so on. So I started going to New York and to Boston to study with different private teachers and listening to a lot of classical music, and trying to get that whole thing together. And by the time I finished at the Coast Guard, I could pretty much play the horn, you know. But I still always wanted to play jazz and improvise. I didn't really know how I was going to fit everything together. But of course, by that time, I had a family. I had gotten married and had 2 little kids. So when I left the Coast Guard, after failing a few orchestra auditions, I auditioned to get into the Tanglewood summer program with James Staliano. And by some quirk of fate, I passed that audition and got into Tanglewood. They even let me out a few days early from the Coast Guard to go to attend. Oh, wow. And so I got there, and I was a little bit late for the first rehearsal. They were playing the Bruckner Ninth with Bernstein conducting. And here's me, I can kind of play the horn, but I don't really have any orchestral experience, except for community orchestras around New London and that area, and community orchestras that I had played in Rochester. So there I am with Bernstein. And Bruckner, and I'm pretty freaked out. But I learned so much, like from the first minute I got there. But I have to tell you this one little story. During the first break of that rehearsal, Bernstein came over. We were all backstage just kind of milling around and getting to know each other and stuff. And he said, "Are you the one that just got out of the Army?" And I said, "Oh, I guess so, yeah." He came, gave me a huge hug and kissed me on the cheek, and it just made me, okay, everything's going to be all right now.
That's great.
It was so wonderful.
Yeah.
So I just started learning so much that I should have known before, you know, but I hadn't been to music school, didn't know anything. And also, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't a great student. But then we went from Bernstein to Ozawa to Gunther Schuller, chamber music, orchestra, everything. It was just like a massive dose of learning for me. And it seemed to make sense to go from there to New England Conservatory. Mm-hmm. That's where almost everybody in the orchestra, they were either from Boston University or NEC.
Okay.
So
from there you went to, which was perfect because I was just going to ask you about NEC, and I know you had some great experiences there. Maybe you could talk about what that was like, and that must have been a great transition going from that, learning from Bernstein, and then you're at NEC with their incredible faculty.
It really was. It really was. Gunther Schuller, in particular, if he were only still alive and I could thank him again and again and again and again. It's the fact that he was the president of NEC at that time made it possible for me to do what I needed to do. And I mean, I was so inexperienced and clueless that I didn't even know what a great opportunity that was. You know what I mean? So here he is, the maestro of composition, of playing the horn. He had been principal horn at the Met, et cetera, but also had been involved in the Miles and Gil project and so on.
Sure.
So he was pretty much behind me all the way, whatever I wanted to do. But my job as a student there was, I had a scholarship and I was supposed to play in the orchestra and do chamber music, brass quintet, et cetera, et cetera. But during my first year there, I really discovered through beginning to freelance outside of school and be very busy in the school and so on, I discovered that just playing in the orchestra and playing chamber music was just not me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I felt like, well, I can do this, but I'd rather do this. Okay. So at the same time, right away, I started studying composition with George Russell. I didn't start with Jackie Byard right away. I think later he became my private teacher. But learning George Russell's concept of tonal organization, mm-hmm. Lydian chromatic concept of tonal organization. Boy, that's a mouthful still. Learning that was what opened up jazz harmony and theory for me, okay? And I'm really, really grateful to George. If he were still alive, I would thank him again and again and again. Because just the first 6 chapters, I think it is, of that book just made everything click for me, Mm-hmm. Other people, I don't know, they say, oh no, I don't get that or whatever. And there are probably other systems of learning jazz theory, but for me that just really worked.
Yeah.
And it also worked for composition, and it inspired me to start writing. Okay? I don't think ever composed anything before I started studying with George. Moving on to my second year, I hadn't been able to insinuate myself into the jazz band or really into the jazz side of the school at all. But Jackie Byard was the one who made it possible for me, because I went and I said, hey, instead of studying with Mr. Stagliano or Mr. Newell, who were great teachers and really had a lot to show me about playing the horn, could I have Jackie Byard for my private teacher? Sure.
Wow.
So that was a really, really great experience.
Well, very progressive of the school to be open to that, especially at that time. I mean,
you see what I mean?
Many places didn't even have a jazz program that.
If Gunther had not been the president at the time, I would have been out. Yeah. Most likely.
Yeah.
Most likely. So Jackie made it possible, and if he were still alive, I'd be doing that same thing with him. He made it possible. He allowed me to play in his big band. There was no French horn chair, but he's like, play one of the bone parts.
Wow.
So
that's great.
I got my transposition together pretty quickly then. But Jackie also, this is a story I will relate at this time. Jackie invited me over to his house one day after my lesson. He said, bring your horn. I said, what do we need my horn for? Never mind, just bring your horn. Well, it turned out Mingus was playing at the jazz workshop with his sextet. And after we were hung out at Jackie's house for a little while, he says, grab your horn, we're going downtown. We went down the jazz workshop and we walk in and I'm carrying my horn like, me clueless. He introduced me to Mingus, And he's, well, I'm kind of elaborating. I'm, what do you call it? Embellishing the story a little bit now.
It's good to
Say,
embellish.
Mingus, you got those French horn parts with you? Because Mingus had written parts for Julius Watkins. They were for horn and F. And so I could read, and I was beginning to be able to play jazz. I wasn't really that proficient yet, but I was doing what Jackie told me to do. I was a good student because I was really interested. Anyway, Mingus let me play with his sextet for a whole night. And then he let me come back and play for a whole second night. So I did 2 nights with Mingus's sextet.
That must have been unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. It was a really unbelievable experience. So I never played with Mingus again after that. He did invite me to play in the big band, but as it turned out, the big band didn't get put together at that time. It did, of
Years
course, later in the, I don't know when they started, sometime in the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
So...
that's fantastic. So, and then following your time at NEC, did you move to New York right away?
Pretty much.
Okay. What was just your memories of that time? I often think of, we've known each other for decades now, but you were of that group of players that, to me, got the best that New York had to offer in terms of the work that was going on then, and how fruitful work was back in that time. But what were your memories of just kind of getting started in New York in those early years?
One really fond memory I have was that before I even found an apartment, I had a couple of gigs that I was doing, and I was staying with a friend. Phone rang one night, and it said, "Is this John Clark?" "Yeah." "This is Gil Evans." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Who is this?" "This is Gil Evans. Can you play with us at the Vanguard Monday night?" "Yeah."
Wow.
So that's a fond memory, and of course started a really long association that lasted 14 years. But that was huge. It was just huge. But at the same time, of course, I had to make a living, and I couldn't. I think we got paid. Did we get paid $50 a night or 20? I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, it wasn't enough to live on.
Right.
So I didn't want to do a day job. I knew I could probably drive a cab or something, but I said, since I do have this classical training, let's see if I can freelance and do other stuff. So I did actually play a lot of contemporary classical music and sub here and there in classical groups. I don't think I ever subbed with the Philharmonic, but I did used to sub with the ballet, and I don't know, other things. And of course, there was Broadway. There was the whole Broadway scene was really, really different, and it has changed an awful lot. It was very relaxed at that time. You had to go in and watch the book one night, but if you made a few mistakes, it was like, you'll get it next time.
Yeah.
It ain't like that now.
No, it's changed dramatically.
Yeah, but it was actually kind of fun then. Everything was very loose. I used to take my kids sometimes with me. I remember this one, I used to sub in the show called Shenandoah. And my kids can still sing a couple of the songs from that show. Because you could take them right into the pit and say, "Oh, can you sit right behind me? Don't be, be quiet. Don't make a lot of noise." I don't think you can do that now either.
Different era for sure.
Yeah.
Well, then you certainly got busy pretty quickly, especially in the studio world. And I'd like to go back to talking about Gil in a minute, but I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts and memories about and what it was like for you in that really busy time of studio work and some of the who were the busy brass players, French horn players you were seeing a lot, and just what was the kind of like what was the scene like at that point?
Jim Buffington, or Buff as everyone called him, was the cat in the studios. There was a duo of him and I can't think of the other guy's name, but the other guy had left, moved out to the Midwest somewhere. So it was really Buff, Brooks Tillotson, Ray Alonji, and they were the three busiest cats. And for some reason, they must have taken a liking to me. Can't imagine why, really, because I was kind of obnoxious, probably. But and I had an attitude about style and playing, because I was so into jazz, and I was like, no one else is into jazz the way I am, you know, that even Buff, one day when I was playing lead on something and Buff wasn't. I don't know why that happened, but I played a certain phrase and they wanted to hear it again. And Buff said, John, why don't you do like a little fan thing, wah, wah, like that? I said, oh man, that's corny. I don't like to do that. and Buff was so confident of himself, and he was just a really, really wonderful human being. He just laughed. I mean, a lot of guys would have been insulted and say, well, why don't you go sit in the corner and I'll play. But he was so cool. He was a wonderful mentor to me. Buff was a guy that if he was in the section or he was even in the room, guys would behave. And if he wasn't there, maybe they wouldn't behave. You know, they'd argue or whatever, you know, behave badly. But Brooks was also a wonderful help to me. They used to recommend me and send me on gigs and stuff because there was so much work that they could afford to.
Yeah.
Okay. Ray Alonji particularly really helped me a lot. And playing with them too was very instructive. They were fantastic players. One thing that I didn't learn from Buff that I should have, now pay attention, students. One day we were at Columbia 30th Street, and Buff had a thing about engineers. He would get really testy with them if they didn't give him what he wanted in his cans or something. And so I forget exactly what happened, but he turned to me and he said, there goes another one. I said, another what? And he said, a chance to keep my mouth shut.
Always, right?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I didn't learn that well enough. And maybe I'll tell another story later about how I didn't keep my mouth shut. Maybe I won't tell that story. I don't know.
At that time, I mean, you were so busy. Who were some of your favorite writers that you were working for?
Don Sebesky.
Yeah.
You know,
of course.
And of course I got his book with the record, and I took his class too. He was one of them. Klaus Ogerman was
Wow.
a really, he wasn't around a lot, but when he was around, you paid attention. Quincy Jones appeared sometimes, and all these guys could really write. You know, I was trying to think of more, and I'm having a hard time thinking of who they were. Kenny Asher is one.
Sure. Yeah.
Jack Kortner was there all the time. Great arranger. They were all great. Carlos Franzetti came on the scene a little bit later, and he was a really, still is an excellent writer.
That must have been. I've always been a big Klaus Hogerman fan. That must have been fun playing his arrangements.
That brings me to another story.
Excellent.
And hopefully,
we love stories.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention any names though.
Okay.
But Klaus Ogerman was the arranger for a date that I got called for once, and I remember that Brooks Tillotson was on it, I was on it, and I'm not going to say who else was on it, but one of the people who was on it had booked themselves through Radio Registry, and I'll explain in a second what Radio Registry was. But this was a person who was not a really great player.
Okay.
And the section sounded so bad that we got fired. We got sent home before the session was over. And I don't know, this was Stanley Turrentine, and I was so excited. Stanley Turrentine, I knew his playing, and I had listened to tons of his records with Jimmy Smith and Kenny Burrell and all that. And I was like, man, the combination of Klaus Ogerman, this is going to be great. And as soon as we sat down and played, I was like, this is not going to be great. So,
oh man. But
that's the kind of thing that could happen. You could have a really bad experience like that and survive and continue working. Now I'll explain what Radio Registry was. We were so busy at the time. Everybody was doing like a zillion dates every week and every day. But the answering machine hadn't been invented yet, and nobody had a cell phone or a beeper. So the only way you could do this was to have an answering service, and they would call you at the studio where they knew you were, or they would call you at home, or you would be constantly calling them to check in. There were payphones back then.
Right.
And you'd leave one studio and stop at a payphone, and they would say, hey, anything new? You know? And it was a kind of a great system. Really worked well for a long time.
I remember back when Edison was open, and there was those. You go down the flight of stairs to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
lobby
yeah.
of the hotel, and
The private line to radio.
all the payphones there, and so on a break you'd see all the musicians all lined up calling radio registry
Yeah.
to check in.
Yeah.
The times have changed, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Gil Evans, if you would, and maybe
Please.
a little bit in depth, because I know he's a very important person for you musically, and I'm sure personally as well. What share your thoughts about Gil?
Oh, I mean, I could probably talk for a week about Gil, but the thing about him is he was so down to earth and not. I mean, you just felt accepted immediately when you were around him, and he allowed the band to misbehave a lot. Okay, but because of that freedom, because we were allowed to do, pretty much whatever we wanted, some unbelievably great things could happen that would never happen if it was all super organized. For instance, I'm sure a lot of people don't know this, but Gil almost never called a tune. We would never say, we're going to do such and such tune. And when we did realize what tune we were going to play, he would never count it off. He wouldn't even stomp his foot.
Wow.
Okay? The way we would start tunes is only if somebody played a little snippet of the melody of a tune, it might catch, like if you're starting a fire out in the woods or something, but it might not catch, and then somebody else would play something from another tune. But if enough people, if there was enough consensus, it would move ahead. But sometimes, in all fairness, I have to say, Gil was at the piano, and sometimes if he would play a snippet of a tune, everybody would grab it right away. So it was very loose in that way, but it was like a really big, small ensemble.
Yeah.
It was almost like a duo or a trio, and everybody was having this Vulcan mind meld kind of thing. So.
Did you feel like Gil also had an influence on you as a writer?
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't play that stuff and hear it and not be influenced by it. What I wish is that I had really picked his brain more about how do you do this, how do you do that. He told me once, a lot of the stuff he would write on napkins and go try it at home. He told me once, I just write barbershop harmony and then I put a little extra note in it. But to find that extra note, he would stay up all night or, spend hours, days trying to find which was the exact extra note. So that actually made such an impression on me. I didn't have any system of arranging, right, that I had learned, even though, I learned a lot of stuff from Don Sebesky about these instruments, if you do this and that, you'll get this result. But what I learned from Gil is that if you want to get a certain sound, you can't just get it by following a rule. You have to consider the context, the vibe, what you're going for, and you have to maybe experiment a lot before you really find it.
That's a really interesting way to say it. We had the great Gil Goldstein as a guest a couple months ago, and he said that exact same thing. It's like barbershop harmony, church harmony with one extra note. But like you just said so well, it's like finding that
but often
note.
There would be more than one extra note. There'd be like 2 or 3 extra notes, but they all just worked perfectly. One time, there was no horn part for some tune, and I said, Gil, what do you want me to play on this? I should just double the melody or something? Yeah, double the melody an octave lower, really softly. And so that's a trick I've been able to use a lot since. I wouldn't have thought of that if he didn't.
I've always thought of you as, there's so many fine French horn players that I get to work with, and obviously you do, but you've always kind of been, in addition to your expertise, you're like a pioneer, and I know you're not the original jazz French horn guy, but you're certainly pushed it in a very significant way in that the instrument in that direction. And when doing a little bit of research for this interview, I saw that you won the Downbeat Critics Poll for 4 years in a row. So you were acknowledged in a way that was appropriate for what you were doing to widen the scope of the instrument. Maybe maybe just talk about that a little bit, about the Downbeat Award and awards and what that was.
Actually, I don't think I won it 4 years in a row.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I think I appeared in it some years in a row, and I think I won it. I was first place one, but I don't remember for sure.
Okay.
Because this was in the 80s, and I know what they say about the 80s.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm pretty sure I was only won it 1 year.
Okay, sorry about that. But at any rate, you were prominently a part of the
Downbeat
those polls.
recognized me at that time.
Yeah.
And I think a good part of the reason was that I was appearing in public a lot with Gil's band, also with Carla Bley's band, and I don't remember what other bands.
Mm-hmm.
George Russell's big band too,
mm-hmm.
and various other small groups and small groups of my own that I would appear with around New York area sometimes. So, but after that, studio work got a lot busier, and I think this is just my own, I don't know, paranoia or what do you call it? Conspiracy theory. I think maybe some of those writers got the idea that I had sold out and become a studio cat and didn't care about jazz anymore. Boy, were they wrong.
Yeah.
Because over the years, I won't mention any names, but there were many, many instances where I turned down a really lucrative studio gig or commercial type gig to do a jazz gig that would pay 1/10 as much. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was always my priority, and anytime I had a chance to be with any jazz group or play jazz or play improvised music, I would do it, even if I had to say no to, a lot of other stuff. But anyway, I didn't appear in Downbeat hardly ever
after that.
And or I don't know, it's maybe not fair, but I think there really is an element of typecasting that people say, oh, he's this, or he's part of the straight ahead jazz crowd, and we don't want him in the downtown scene. I used to be pretty active in the downtown scene too. One of my favorite things that I did was with the great violinist and composer Leroy Jenkins. He had a quintet called the Mixed Quintet that was horn, violin, clarinet, flute, and bass clarinet, I think it was. And I loved that group. Mm-hmm. I really loved that. We played a lot around New York. We toured, we recorded. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. Julius Hempel was another master in that scene that I played with a lot, and I really loved it. Actually, he had a big band that both Vincent Chansey and I played in. Very rare experience of two French horns in a big band. So, but I think, I'm not sure, but I think maybe some people in that scene thought, oh, he's a studio cat. He probably, we don't want him here, or he wouldn't be interested. I was interested in everything. All of it.
It's interesting, and I think that's what we all face with musicians, and perhaps it's in life in general. But getting pigeonholed, and people seem to want to put you in a box and say, well, this is what this guy does. And so, it's kudos to you for plowing through that and staying true to trying to play the music that you wanted to play, and that's great. I know you've had so many, and you've already shared a couple of them with us, but do you have some favorite projects that you look back on and say, wow, I was so happy to be on that record or that movie or whatever it might happen to be?
Yeah, several, I guess. But the Quincy Jones and Frank Sinatra thing was pretty huge.
I guess.
Yeah, just being in the same room with some of those cats.
Yeah.
George Benson. I don't remember a lot of. Well, Steve Gadd was on drums. Ron Carter played bass, I think. Yeah, I don't remember a lot of them. And of course, in the brass and the winds was all the same cats that I was seeing every day anyway. Mm-hmm. Randy, Alan Rubin, Dave Taylor, etc. So that's a fond memory. Anything with Gil is a fond memory.
Sure. You played, I know you have credits with my two guitar heroes, Pat Metheny and John Scofield. What was the experience like working with those guys?
Pat Metheny is just actually a very humble cat and then fun to be around. I don't remember that much about the music. It was kind of a long time ago, and because I don't think I ever did anything live with Pat, only studio stuff. So and Gil Goldstein, I think, arranged at least one of them. So that was great music and great fun, but I don't remember it as well as I remember Sco, because I actually knew Sco from way back because we were in Boston at the same time. I was at NEC, he was at Berkeley, and I used to know him and go hear him play everywhere around Boston. But I did a tour with him in the UK. I want to say that was in the early 90s or something. And then recently played with him at Lincoln Center just last year.
Oh, right.
Where we did the music from the Quiet album.
Right.
And I had forgotten how great that was. Boy, to play it over again, you know, for 2 whole days of rehearsal and gig, that was really, really nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that record. I remember, I think that was his first record on Verve, if I'm not mistaken, but he signed the new deal and came out with something completely different than what he'd done up to that point. It was very cool.
Excuse me.
No, please.
Mike Gibbs and Joni Mitchell. Do you know the album Don Juan's Reckless Daughter?
I don't.
I don't know if it's even around in print, but students, take note. Go get it if you can. I don't even know if it's available. I have the LP somewhere at home.
Is Joni's record?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a fantastic record, but it was so unusual because it's Weather Report accompanying Joni and Mike Gibbs arranging a huge orchestra after the fact. Okay?
Wow.
So you got Jaco, you got Wayne Shorter, you got Joni Mitchell singing a bunch of originals of hers that are great songs anyway, but then there's this orchestra that Mike Gibbs arranged from listening to the rhythm section and the singer. So
wow, that sounds really
I remember it very fondly. This is quite a while back. This is 1970 something. I want to say 74 or 5 maybe.
How would you describe, and it's always interesting to hear a description, and I think it's helpful for young folks, is we always say, you know, oh, you should have been here when, you know, wow, it was great then, and clearly there was some amazing times, but nowadays it's, you know, it's the evolution of being a musician, and it changes. You know, I mean, you remember how musicians reacted when recording of music came into popularity, and everybody was freaked out about that. How would you, in your words, describe how the scene in New York has evolved, changed? What are things that you would you've noticed over the years, and where it's at, say, kind of like now compared to 70s, 80s, etc.?
Instant gratification has become part of the scene. Someone called me for a jingle one day, and I don't remember how many years ago it was, and I didn't call back for like 5 or 10 minutes, and they had gotten someone else already. So, and I said, "What?" I was flabbergasted. I said, "What? Why? Well, you just didn't call me back as soon as I wanted you to." Okay. But because we have cell phones and beepers now, people want to get stuff done immediately. That's something I don't really miss about the whole recording scene, the studio scene. What I do now, mostly everything I do, I know what I'm going to do a week or 2 ahead of time.
Right.
I don't book stuff 3 years ahead of time the way some people do, but that's changed. And because everyone has a home studio, that's what's really changed the recording scene. A lot of the big rooms closed because they didn't have enough big projects, and everyone who has a small project can do it with their laptop and 2 mics. So that's changed. The Broadway scene, as we were saying earlier, has really changed a lot.
And I know you do recording yourself as well, right? People nowadays, which I think is a great testament to you, that you're staying up with the times, and that is becoming a mobile recording, being able to send tracks and record them at home and send them back to the person hiring you.
It's really fun to do, actually. And one little thing about that, I will warn you students, some of the people that will ask you to do tracks maybe can't read music.
Yeah.
And they don't have that much experience. So a couple of the gigs that I've done online like that, I've had to look at waveforms to figure out where the beat is and how to put my part with it. They didn't send me a written part. They just maybe sent me a MIDI version of what they want the French horn to play, and I have to figure out where to put it. So it's really challenging, but fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's a fun kind of challenge. I can't remember the name, but I had one experience pretty recently where somebody actually sent me a track with click and a part that was correct. And I was like, bada bing, bada boom. It was done. That was really fun. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. Someone like Bob Magnuson, the great reed player, he does a lot of that. And you can do it for someone in Australia or wherever.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I like your approach to it, because you can easily say, you know, well, it's not like it was in the 70s. Well, that's right, it isn't.
Yeah.
But here's what it is now, and you want to jump on board, or you want to stay back. And speaking of moving forward, let's talk a little bit about your company, Hidden Meaning Music, and you've released your publications as well as the recordings. Tell us about that.
I started that in 1978. I just had the feeling that I wanted to record some tunes that I had written, that I had been playing with my quartet. And I didn't want anyone to produce it. I didn't want a label to be involved with, because I wanted to make all the mistakes myself without. And it worked out pretty well, actually, because the budget was so low that it was able to pay for itself pretty quickly. I paid all the other musicians a percentage every year of what my net or gross or whatever, and everybody did pretty well. So that was successful, and then I thought, oh, well, you know, I could sell arrangements, I could do this, I could, you know, sell other recordings. And it hasn't been a mega business, but it's just been something that I've kept up all along. And now, actually, on my website, there's a store with all different kinds of arrangements, stuff that I've done for the Imani Winds, the great wind quintet. In fact, that's an experience that I look back fondly at, even though it was about 3 weeks ago. They asked for an arrangement of Sam Cooke's A Change Gonna Come.
Oh, okay.
And I had such a ball arranging that. And so that arrangement will probably be for sale in my store.
Nice.
Then in the 90s or so, some friends in the studio scene and all around started encouraging me to write down exercises that they would hear me practicing, because I'd started to make up a lot of different exercises. And oh, John, you should write that down. I said, oh, I'm not sure what it is. So, but gradually I put it all together, and I made this book, Jazz Exercises for Jazz French Horn. That's been a big seller over the years.
Yeah.
I'm going to do volume 2 also pretty soon. I started on it. It's going to finish pretty soon, I hope. I don't know what else to say about the business, really.
Yeah, well, it's just great. I mean, of course, I had followed a similar path with HIP-BoneMusic and doing stuff, but I think it's, especially now for young folks, you know, it's almost a necessity if you want to be involved in creative music.
It seems that way.
You know, there aren't labels signing multitudes of artists these days. But that said, it's a wonderful opportunity if you want to take the initiative to do it yourself.
Yeah. You just made me think of another thing about how the scene has changed. So just rewinding a little bit. I've always, as I mentioned, ever since studying with George Russell, I wanted to be a composer, and so that seems to have escalated. And I learned actually while from teaching in the jazz department at MSM, they really encourage students not to just be a player, but to be an educator and a composer. Because after all, jazz improvisation and composition are really the same thing, just goes at a different speed.
Right.
Okay, so one thing that's changed a lot is kids write tunes. You know, they write arrangements and stuff. And for me, since I'm able to take the time now to write more, and I'm associated with a couple of groups. Like last night, I played a concert with this organization called Composers Concordance, which brings composers together a lot to play each other's music, or they do all kinds of different formats. But so I'm just pushing ahead more with writing music, because I figure that's something I can do even when I become like 99 years old. I might not be playing the French horn at that age, but I used to think of like 60 as being like the limit of what you could play a brass instrument at, but that's of course no longer true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at Doc Severinsen still ripping off high G's and A's at
Doc
90.
Cheatham.
Yeah.
Doc Cheatham is another one. Vince DeRosa was still playing at age 80. I think he stopped playing around 82, but you know, he's in great health.
Yeah. John, what as we kind of wind down a little bit, what I know you mentioned some of your future projects, but what do you have on the front burner coming up?
Oh, that book, the writing. Composition. As far as albums, I really don't know. Like right now, I don't know if I have as much music as I would want to make an album, but something that people are doing nowadays is releasing one track at a time.
Right.
And I might be doing some of that. I did, actually, one thing that I did recently was send a basic track to a bass player, drummer, and keyboard player, and have them send me back their parts, and I redo my part and then add whatever I want. So I'm kind of messing around with that. I'm not an expert engineer, but I'm learning.
Yeah, very cool.
So that's the kind of thing I'll be doing, writing more, playing more. Every summer I go to Austria and participate in this outreach festival, and we always have an opportunity to write something there for the outreach orchestra, which is kind of a very big band. Franz Hackel is the music director, and he gives us a lot of freedom. He's kind of a Gil in that sense. We can write any kind of music, and there can be a singer, or there can be a smaller thing or a bigger thing. So I'll probably continue doing that every summer.
Nice, yeah. Well, we all look forward to seeing what John Clark does next, so keep up all
Me
that.
too.
And as we finish out, I always like to end this because we do have a lot of young viewers, and I think it is, like you said, teaching is an important part, but not only teaching, but offering advice from a seasoned professional who's been at the top of the game for so long. What advice do you have for young players coming up now, and in terms of trying to be a musician in this day and age?
Seize every opportunity to keep your mouth shut. No, I'm joking, but not necessarily. Now, see, I didn't tell that story. That's good. That's good. I kept my mouth shut about that story. But, you know, listening is something that I don't know if is really emphasized enough to students. One of my horn teachers, Tom Newell in Boston, used to tell me, listen to singers, listen to singers. I didn't know what he meant. I listen to singers all the time. I got the radio on. I'm listening to Aretha Franklin. I'm listening to Frank Sinatra. I'm listening to whoever. But there's a way of listening that I guess I wasn't taught. And so I advise you to listen and figure out what you're listening for. Sometimes you should listen for sound, okay? Because really, like they say, if you don't have a sound, what do you have? Listen for sound, listen for harmony, listen for melody, listen for a groove. There are all kinds of different things to listen for, and you can't necessarily always listen to the same thing at the same time. So pay attention when you're listening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so well said. I mean, listening is the probably the most important thing we can do as a human being too, but certainly as a musician.
Yeah.
It's like,
but not just I'm sorry, excuse me. Not just as a student, but as a player too. When you're playing in the band, and this is something I learned from Lou, when you're playing in a band, well, if it's an orchestra, that's important too. You need to be listening to the whole rest of the orchestra. But in a band, when you're improvising, you really need to pay attention to what the drummer's doing, what the bass player is doing, what everyone else is doing around you. Because if you're soloing, you don't want to be just like spewing a stream of notes. You want to be reacting and not mimicking, but responding. You want to be involved with everything that's going on around you. So listen.
Yeah, great. John, thank you so much for coming up today. This has been such a pleasure, and really enjoyed it. Hope all of you enjoyed it as much as we did here today, and we will see you next time on Bone2Pick.